Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Glenn Master, co-founder of the International Supply Chain Protection Organization, and this is webcast number 5. The topic is strategic cargo theft. And for those of you who saw several years ago in 2024, we actually did a podcast on the same topic with the same individual to the left of me. So I want to bring in our special guest, Scott Cornell, fresh off the airplane from Phoenix, Arizona. Longtime friend, former board director of the ISCPO,
Yeah.
An industry professional. And I'm not going to steal your thunder because a lot of changes this year, especially from a career standpoint.
A lot of changes. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I was glad we were able to get it together to do it live together in the studio. Last time we did it remote. So this is fun getting together and being here with you. Always good to see you, my friend. Yeah, big changes for me. Did roughly just shy of 25 years at my former employer, but about 2.5 months ago, I moved to a company called Logistic with a Q on the end. Took over as the vice president of risk and strategy there, and then we were purchased by a company called SPG, which I knew going into this, and merged with a company called Innova. So slowly but surely, right now we're SPG Innova Logistic, and I'm the chief risk officer. And eventually, I think it's going to be called something like SPG Cargo and Logistics or something like that. That'll come together. But we're the largest MGA in the industry, so we actually can offer all lines of insurance and coverage to the transportation industry. It's a great group of people. The people at Logistic I'd been doing business with and knew for about 11 years prior to coming in, so it wasn't like I was going to work with any strangers. So I retired from the past place, came on over here, doing what I've always done, being the subject matter expert on cargo theft and managing risk and working closely with our clients to try and teach them how not to have the thefts in the first place, but also giving them a solution if they do have a theft. How can we help them and respond with them? So it's only 2.5 months in, haven't built everything out yet, but that's the fun of it, right? Is building it.
Sure.
So that's the exciting part.
Is your application going to be across just United States, global?
No, we're going to the Innova team that merged with us. They were already doing international. We're doing domestic in Canada. So there'll be some emergence. There'll be international freight forwarding involved in it, but we already have a presence in Mexico and Canada, and there'll be some in South America as well. But eventually we'll be all over. So yeah, it is really exciting, and it's going to be great.
As somebody who has built now 4 programs at 4 different companies, I know the challenges,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of long hours.
It is.
In year 1, you probably are not going to sleep, and you're going to be on an
Yeah.
airplane every week.
Yeah, yeah, but it's fun, right?
Yeah,
I mean, the challenge of building things and being creative, that's the fun part of it, right? That's the adventure.
Awesome. So obviously this is almost part 2, right? So we did this remotely, the end of 2024, maybe the beginning of 2025.
Yeah.
And it was kind of interesting, right? Because the whole topic was strategic cargo theft. The ISCPO every year, we normally will adopt an industry risk or an industry problem. 2024 was strategic cargo theft. Last year, we partnered with TAT Truckers Against Trafficking to try to combat
Great
human
organization.
trafficking. Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
And sure enough, 2026, we are now back to strategic cargo theft. But it was interesting because when we spoke, it was obviously on everybody's mind. It was impacting multiple verticals from technology to retail to pharmaceutical manufacturing. I mean, you name it. All verticals across the supply chain were being impacted by this, but it was amazing how many security practitioners and also law enforcement had no idea really what this was. So I think we pretty much illustrated that the vernacular had changed from fictitious pickups to strategic cargo theft. But 2025 was kind of a pivot point. And I think a lot of that came with the 60 Minutes expose on Guy Fieri and Simi Hagar's Santos Tequila heist. And all of a sudden, this topic now became mainstream. So
Yeah.
where did you see the shift in 2025?
Well, it's ironic, right? So if we back up just a little bit, so I'm in town this week, obviously, for the Southwest Transportation Security Council's Cargo Theft Summit, which is held at the BNSF headquarters over in Fort Worth. You'll be there, I know, right? And we always see each other there every year. And JJ puts on a great conference, right? And this year it's maxed out, right? So that kind of speaks to what we're talking about, right? So the attendance had to get cut off. we're absolutely at max for registration, and that's because everybody's scrambling to try and keep up with the new methods, the latest intel in the industry. So what's ironic about the strategic cargo theft part is in 2013 or 2012 or 2013, myself and DZ Patterson, who you're also familiar with, right? We stood in front of the room here at this conference and we said, hey, this strategic cargo theft thing, at the time, like you said, we were all calling it fictitious pickup. This fictitious pickup thing, we think it's going to be a problem in the future. And we kind of got you guys are overstating it. It's not going to be that big of a deal,
Yeah.
right? And here we sit, right? But the part of it that's still ironic is in all cargo theft, it's still only about 30 to 33% of all cargo theft, right? But it's the hardest to defend. It's the most confusing because we went from, at that time when we talked about it in 2012, 2013-ish, right? There were two methods. There was the fictitious pickup and the identity theft. And so the fictitious pickup one was the most used at the time. So that's what we were calling it. And then it morphed into 4 or 5 methods, but it still stayed around, Gary Thomas from CargoNet and I are going to be doing a presentation tomorrow talking about how, hey, and even in 2017, it was still like 3%, 4%, but then 2021 to 2024, it explodes. All cargo theft goes up 93%, but strategic theft goes up 1,475%. We went from 3 or 4 methods to 25 to 30 methods. And that's why that 33% of all cargo theft is getting the most attention, because it's the most complex, it's the most strategic, right? That's why it's called that. It's so tricky. It's hard. I find when I speak at conferences and we get to the Q&A part, people are asking me about incidents that they've experienced, and they're having a hard time telling me how they were stolen from. So I have to ask them 4 or 5 questions to kind of get to, okay, I think this is the method that you saw, right? And so when you look at it, and you mentioned, the 60 Minutes piece, right? And then recently we've also seen the lobster theft, and then the tobacco, or the what do you call those? The nicotine pouches. The nicotine pouches. And then recently there was a load of creatine, all from kind of high profile people or influencers and everything like that. And, there's a part of me that says, hey, every day, and you and I both know this, we see it every day, there are $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $500,000, $600,000 loads stolen. Not a peep, right? Those loads get stolen, and there's some influencers tied to them or some very recognizable people. It does provide a great opportunity for the average American citizen to hear suddenly, right? Because those high profile people bring the attention to it, which unfortunately for them, they're bringing the attention to it. But for the industry that you and I have been working in for so long, it is great to see that gets it in the spotlight, brings it in front of the average person and says, hey, this is what's going on. Now, those tequila loads, don't quote me, I think they were like $70,000 to $100,000 in value, which is half of the average value. I think the last average value that CargoNet put out was about 190,000, right? But very high profile, again, gets us in the spotlight, right? Gets the whole topic out there to the average person and makes people realize, hey, this is really going on. Because I think I've said to you before, when I go to my wife, when I return from this, I have to go to my wife's annual awards banquet for what she does. She's in real estate. And inevitably somebody will ask me what I do. And when I tell them, they look at me like I have 3 F's, right?
So it's interesting because I'm thinking back to just some of the topics that we discussed in late 2024. And, the resounding fact was that there was just a lack of education, and the criminals now that are participating are internationally based.
Correct.
It's multi-layered. They're fully taking advantage of our brokerage system. And, what we did in 2024 last year actually spawned off about 2 or 3 different web podcasts that ISCPO did. And we discussed crime that was taking place, similar type of cargo theft out of Canada, out of the UK. And the law enforcement community, the private industry security community in both those geographic areas we're actually now just starting to see the same thing. And it wasn't as prevalent because their brokerage systems were not as compromised as our brokerage systems, but by the end of Q4, in a lot of the investigations that I were a part of, in a way, I kind of felt sorry for the brokerage companies because they were doing everything that they were supposed to do, and they had no idea they were being duped by fraudsters, sometimes even until a month later, but yet the industry doesn't seem to care, and they want to allow the broker to hold the bag. So, how do we continue with that education? And also from a preventive standpoint, especially, what can brokers do different that they're not doing today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a a little bit of a multi-layered answer to this, right? I think part of the education is coming from the amount of it, right? There's a certain point that the industry has gotten to now where you can't ignore it. You can't think that it's somebody else's problem anymore, right? So we're seeing much more shipper involvement in the attempt to find solutions than 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, right? Whereas we know how the industry works, right? The shipper gets the freight broker gets the carrier. And that's kind of how the marching orders work too, right? Like the shipper tells the freight broker what they need, what they want. The broker then tells the carrier what they need, what they want. And it kind of goes in that order, right? When it came to theft, it went the opposite, right? It was, the carriers, because again, strategic theft was maybe 3%. So the carriers were getting hit with what we call straight theft. They were having the theft. So they ended up having to kind of hold the bag on that quite often, right? Their insurance would cover it or they'd be somehow liable for it. The broker, in large part, didn't experience a lot of cargo theft. They had what was, primarily they were operating on what was called contingent cargo insurance, meaning the only time their insurance would have to kick in is if the trucker's insurance didn't kick in, right? And the shippers almost never, it never really came back that far up to the shippers, right? Where the shippers were responsible for the load, unless they did something wrong in a fictitious pickup or something like that, where it could be argued, right? So now you have this sudden surge in strategic theft, and the least prepared part of the supply chain for that was probably the intermediary space, the freight brokers, because not because of anything they did wrong, like you said, but because of the fact that they just hadn't experienced a lot of it. So now when you talk about education, unfortunately, the education's coming from the fact that they're dealing with it every day and they're trying to stem it. So what do they need to do differently? I think we need to take it off the freight brokers and make it everybody's problem, right? I've said this openly for a while. You started ISCPO, and I was always honored to be a founding member of the board there. I currently serve as the chairman for TAPA Americas, right, which is a similar type organization. And what are we trying to do with both of those organizations? We're trying to get everybody in the supply chain together to think about supply chain security. And I think that's really what needs to happen, is there needs to become a culture around supply chain security that everybody participates in, no different than the safety culture that was developed decades ago in the supply chain, right? And I think we're starting to see that. I think when I come to our conferences, I go to your conference, we'll go to JJ's, you're going to see shippers, brokers, and carriers all in the room together with law enforcement, all trying to figure out how can we work together to get this solved. Now, is everybody participating yet? No. Now, if we go back to your original part of your question about what can the freight brokers do different, it goes back to the vetting process, right? Do they know exactly who they're doing business with? And the number one pushback, you've heard it as well as I have, right? Which is, hey, we're trying to move freight as quickly and as efficiently as we can, right? And I've said numerous times the old Wyatt Earp saying, right, is fast is good, but slow is accurate, right? And I understand that the supply chain is trying to move quickly, but when you have a theft, how quickly are you moving then, right? It becomes glacial at that point. Everything slows down. So if we just put a couple of more minutes in the process, just a little bit more in the process, from the thefts that I see, so many of them come back to the most basic and simple mistakes, right? 6 loads to a carrier that has 2 power units, right? Things like that. Where, Gary Thomas with CargoNet always says, if people would just use Google a little bit more, right? Google the address, Google the carrier, go to the original website, things like that.
Doing their due diligence.
Well, yeah, and and it's great. Listen, there's a bunch of platforms out there we know of, right, that are out there to vet carriers. But I think all too often if I buy this technology, I'm all set. And that's not the way it works, right? When you buy that technology, it should be enhancing an internal process. And that's what you do every day, right? You create internal process. You should have an internal process that exists, like the TAPA freight broker security requirements or best practices that you require, that you build in internally or whatever, right? You should have that. And then you buy that technology platform to enhance that process, almost like a checks and balance type of thing.
So the elephant that is in the room, right, is we're doing the education, we're getting all the right players. We're getting law enforcement, we're getting security practitioners, we're getting freight brokers. So the cat's out of the bag. I mean, obviously this is an industry-wide problem. It's a global problem. But the elephant in the room is laws are not catching up to the criminals. I'm hearing this with colleagues in law enforcement out of the UK, and they're trying to educate legislators on this current and evolving problem. Law enforcement out of Canada dealing with the same thing. And you and I, late 2024, we were part of an organization that went to the U.S. Chamber and essentially educating legislators of the problem across multiple business verticals. Right. So I know there was bipartisan legislation, CORCA, that is coming out of that. What can you share as far as the progress with that?
Yeah, so I was just in Washington last week, got a little bit of an update. It made it through markup, right? It seems very bipartisan, just like you said. I've been involved in this now so this goes to your commentary, right? I think 3 years I've been working on this, right? It was originally an organized retail crime bill that was brought to my attention. I then helped write the cargo theft language that went into it. Senator Grassley's office was great. Yeah, hey, that makes sense. If you write the language up, we'll include cargo theft in it. And then they asked that we go around and help get all the co-sponsors on board. Didn't really get any pushback from the co-sponsors, which was great. So again, it goes back to it was remarkably very bipartisan, made it through markup. And supposedly, I think Speaker Johnson wants it to be part of the highway bill that he wants to get passed, right? That's just an update that I heard literally before I came up here to do this with you. So that would be great if that happens. And supposedly they want that highway bill to get passed sometime this year before midterms and everything like that. So if we could get that passed, you and I both know that creates a federal task force, right? That would be led by HSI, but it would also have elements of the FBI and I believe ATF and some other federal agencies, obviously DOT, things like that. And then it would mandate the tracking of cargo theft numbers by the federal government, which, to me, don't build it. It already exists. We, you and I every day, I'm not trying to give them a plug, but you and I every day, we look at CargoNet numbers. Everybody else in the industry looks at CargoNet numbers. It's already built. Just use it. Let's not try and rebuild the wheel, right? And then it mandates federal prosecutors, which I think, as much as everybody's excited about that task force part of it, those dedicated federal prosecutors to me are key, because you and I have seen over the time the difficulty with getting some of these cases prosecuted, right? So I think if there are federal prosecutors that get the at-bats at these and they start to get a rhythm on it, they start to get a real feel and understanding for how these crimes take place, that we'll start to see some real effective prosecution with that whole task force. Now, I think a lot of people are looking at this, hey, if this gets passed, cargo theft is solved.
No, of course not.
Of course not, right?
Of course not. And it's interesting because if everything goes perfectly, right, and in a perfect world, and we get federal law enforcement collaboration with local, state, private sector, we will start moving the needle as far as putting bad guys in jail. But as we know, this crime now is evolving internationally. So it was kind of interesting in speaking to counterparts in other parts of the world. They're almost sitting back on their heels saying, look, we are challenged with the same problem, and it's evolving and it's increasing. And we're trying to educate our government officials on this problem, and a lot of times it's going on deaf ears. So as their problems continuously increase, as with most things, especially in supply chain, they're looking at the U.S. as, all right, we're going to use you guys as the benchmark, and if it works there, it's going to give us some ammunition with our federal law enforcement and being able to try to push laws that are going to favor putting these international criminals, behind bars.
Sure. I think a bigger part of that will be the cooperation, right? So if we have a federal task force, just like you said, we discussed it last time we did this type of a get together, that the head of the snake, so to speak, is overseas, right? So, and that to me has been more than proven firsthand by the fact that there have been some significant arrests over the last year or two of suspects that people thought were the leaders or the ringleaders of some of these organized rigs, right? And cargo theft hasn't gone down at all. It's basically flat, right? And that goes to, Keith Lewis and I always say, those guys are the regional managers. They're over here, right? The president and CEO is overseas, right? And so they just appoint a new regional manager and nothing changes, right? So we don't see that reduction that I think people are seeing. So if we get that federal task force and they want to go after the head of the snake, will some of these other countries help, where maybe some of these heads of these organizations are sitting? Will they get cooperation from that and things like that? If you talk to the FBI working cases and stuff like that, that's some of the things they want to accomplish, is they want to go after the ringleaders overseas. The question is always, what country are they in, and will we get cooperation with those countries? So that'll be interesting to see as that goes forward.
Well, we can only hope, and I would hope maybe this time next year we'll be back in studio and we can revisit this topic, because I know it's on everybody's mind, both domestically, internationally, and when we started this in 2024, it was education, education. We're now at that point where we're seeing a lot more collaboration with law enforcement. We're educating our legislation, and hopefully we can get some laws passed that get some teeth.
I think, I continue to hear a little bit, all too often, that law enforcement doesn't care about this. And you and I both know that's just not factually correct, right? When you look at that CTIPS task force, the LA County Sheriff's task force, the LAPD unit, the Miami-Dade team, the Florida statewide, any of these that we operate with or we work with on cases, they're going after it every day. They're working their tails off. That CTIPS task force has had so many warehouse recoveries and busts over the last couple of years. They just do a fantastic job. Every chance I get, I try and praise them, because it's amazing what they're getting done over there, right? And then when you get to police officers that maybe aren't familiar with cargo theft, do you have to do a little bit more explaining? Do you have to make them realize what's going on? Certainly, but once they realize what's going on, I don't find anybody resistant to get engaged, right? Sure. Once you explain it to them. So I think it's a little bit more about communication sometimes. You call and you don't really understand how you've been stolen from with these strategic theft methods, so you can't really explain it. And so then it sounds like it might be a civil matter, a dispute between you and a truck driver or something like that. So I get the miscommunication or the confusion sometimes, but I think law enforcement's been very engaged.
Well, I'm going to hold you to it this time next year, back in studio, and we're going to do part 3 of this if you're game for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Always, we can do it right around the same conference. But anytime you ask me, I'll certainly do it.
Awesome. Well, again, I want to thank you for being a guest and close friend, and definitely helping combat this international problem. Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to wrap up today's web podcast, and obviously we could not do this without the support of our preferred vendors. 3 in particular that are sponsoring today's webcast. Verkada offers cloud-based solutions, CCTV and access control, phenomenal in the industry, growing globally. 7P Solutions, offering GPS wide tracking technology, and Eagle AI, offering a brand new AI-driven truck yard management process that not only can help with inbound and outbound truck check-ins and checkouts, but also eliminating and reducing guard coverage. I've worked through the years with all 3 of these preferred solution providers. They're phenomenal. And if you were to look at this topic of strategic cargo theft, all 3 are big players in helping to reduce our exposure. So we're looking forward to combating this continued problem, and looking forward to our next web podcast at ISCPO. Thank you very much.